One, two, three, go.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard Benville with another interview for the show Hello Central. I'm here on Front Street with somebody that I've been dying to talk to for a very, very long time, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Lieutenant Governor Mead Treadwell, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alaska,
yes,
our heroes.
Best state in the union.
How? Yeah, is this true? I heard this a long time ago. That when you, in order for a state to become a state, or you know to come into Alaska and Hawaii, it had to be a unanimous vote from all the states, and one state held out, and I'm told it was Texas because it didn't want anything bigger.
Well, there were a bunch of Texans who were upset that
That's right.
we'd be 2.5 times the size of Texas, but no, it was a simple majority vote.
It was a simple majority.
Yep.
Oh, I like my story much better.
Oh yeah, well, there are a bunch of people from Texas who regret their vote later.
Before Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Treadwell, where were you?
Well, in government, I was chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, so I came to know him very often. Worked with people like Vera Metcalf, Charlie Johnson. Before that, Caleb Pungawi, bless his heart, may he rest in peace.
Yeah.
And I was also deputy commissioner of DEC in the Hickel administration. So that's my government resume. And privately, I've been in business. I helped start a software company called Digimarc. I helped Governor Wally Hickel start a gas pipeline venture. I was chairman of the company that made that spherical camera that started Street View for Google.
Oh, wow.
And, we mapped most of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Are you Alaskan born?
No, I got here as fast as I could. I got here the year I got out of high school. I was actually born in New Haven, Connecticut, and I went to Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you were happier in Alaska.
Oh, I'm totally happy in Alaska.
And one thing, because when we want to talk about astronauts, check this, you're not going to believe this, but my reason for wanting to interview Mead is because of his hard work and interest and getting America more involved, and I mean not just Alaska, but I mean America, in those issues of the very far north, the Arctic, what is it, the Council of the North?
Well, yeah, and the the Arctic Council is 8 Arctic nations around the top of the world.
Exactly.
And I've been actively involved in that, either for the state of Alaska back when it started in the 90s, been part of it from the Arctic Commission, and now represent the state of Alaska on the Arctic Council.
And when those of my viewers who are not from Nome or not from Alaska, get on a map, look at a globe, and look down on that map from the North Pole. And in the North Pole, of course, which is not on a continent like Antarctica, so it's water, and there's a lot happening up here. And we're going to talk about some of the issues: transportation, development. And when you look at the North Pole and you see those countries that share the North, that have a common legacy, if you will, a part to play in this very, very interesting part of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, Richard, let's just start who are our neighbors. We all know we can see Russia from our house because we almost, 147 years ago we were Russia.
That's right.
Yeah, but Russia is just to the west of us, and then beyond Russia is Finland, and Sweden and Norway. Denmark is tucked down beneath those countries, but they own Greenland and the Faroe Islands. And then there's Iceland and Canada. And that makes 8 Arctic nations, including the United States. And it's Alaska that makes America an Arctic nation.
Right.
And so what we have to do is convince the rest of the country to understand that not only are we a Pacific nation and an Atlantic nation, we're an Arctic nation. And we live in this neighborhood at the top of the world, which has a brand new ocean. Now, people here have been fishing and hunting and sealing on this ocean for 10,000 years, but the fact is that for global trade, I tell those third graders, all those explorers' names you had to remember, we are actually living the dream that they had.
That's very true.
And last year, in 2013, 60 ships came through the Bering Strait.
Yeah.
Most of them carrying fuel of some kind or another. And Vladimir Putin predicted, read his message April 22nd to his Security Council. 1, he wants to control it, but 2, he sees tonnage on the Arctic Ocean shipping routes doubling again.
Well, I do an exercise, and I've done it with the State Chamber, which is one of the reasons why you're here to address the board that came to Nome for a visit. And because I sometimes chide them about where the resources are. They're on the rail belt, and in Anchorage they think, I don't know what they think, but a lot of their money is based on the resources that are out here. They're not in Anchorage. And then I go, picture the northern hemisphere. How many ways can you get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean? And there are two, the Panama Canal and the Bering Straits, which is just shy of 100 miles from where we are. And when you think about that, which is how many more months that shoulder is now, well, 4 or 5 months accessible.
There are three things making this ocean accessible. A lot of people say it's climate change. And yes, there are more ice-free months. The shipping season begins now, late July, can go all the way to December, where it's navigable with some kind of ice-hardened vessel, and it's actually going to get longer than that. But it's also the technology. Icebreaker technology has gotten to be so much better. Did you ever read Dr. Dolittle as a kid?
Of course.
And there was that animal in Dr. Dolittle called the push me pull you.
Push me pull me.
Yeah, push me pull you. It was an animal with two heads. But I mean, the fact is, you can now build an icebreaker with a giant spoon-shaped bow for icebreaking, or a V-shaped bow for going in heavy seas where there is no ice. And so all you have to do, and the propulsion, rather than being a propeller on the end, is an azopod in the middle, and that helps your ship be very efficient in going either direction. So it's the changing ice conditions, it's the changing technology, and here's the third one. The effect of Red Dog, the effect of the North Slope, the effect of Norway's investments in places like Hammerfest, is that there's now so many resource producing areas in the Arctic. About 13% of the world's oil is to be found in the Arctic, about 30% of the world's gas. So it's technology, resources, and climate, which is opening up this ocean.
And we are a state. Alaska is, of course, a state of resources, certainly our oil. Yeah. It drives the economy of Alaska. 85 some odd % of our economy is a result of the oil and gas industry. We have timber, we have gas, but one of our greatest resources is our geography. And that is from the Cold War, and just outside of Nome on Anvil Mountain, we have a White Alice. Yep. When the United States and the Soviet Union were like this, and I lived through that. I remember going when my dad was stationed in England, and I'd go to bed at night thinking and knowing that the bombs were on the planes that were about a half a mile from my head. And that was I remember those times very well. But when we talk about development of resources, when I talked about your playing a role in that, because I think it was Hillary Clinton was the first Secretary of State to attend some of those meetings, and now
Hillary was the first secretary to go to an Arctic Council meeting. Right. I went with her, and I actually traveled previously with an undersecretary. But think about it this way: we had to bring together the neighborhood at the top of the world to set the rules for this ocean. And we set an agenda. I was chair of the commission that paid for the document. It was agreed by all 8 nations. It said, let's figure out how we do search and rescue. Because right now the United States relies on, say, helicopters of the North Slope Borough to get out there. The Coast Guard helicopters are way, way far away in Kodiak. And so we had to push for forward basing of our helicopters. We divvied up the Arctic Ocean on a search and rescue agreement, and that's what Hillary signed when I was with her in Greenland in 2011. And we had negotiated that agreement ahead of time. In 2013, John Kerry went to Sweden. My son was graduating from high school, so I skipped the meeting and went to my son's graduation. But we had negotiated an oil spill response agreement so that we've got a good protocol to help each other in the case of an oil spill. We also are working to make sure that the ships in the Arctic have things that are made for the Arctic, like heated life rafts. Because if you have a shipwreck in an ocean where it's cold and dark, you want people to survive. So we're working on that. But here's the toughest one yet. And ships are used to plying the world's oceans and not having to pay attention to the people on the coastline. And I keep saying, I say in all these international forums, Alaskans are concerned about food security. If you live in Western Alaska, the odds are what you're having for dinner, maybe something you've caught, something you've shot, some eggs you've gathered, some berries you've gathered, some seal you've taken, some walrus you've taken. And the people who go out in small boats after these animals, they don't have the big beacons that the big ships have and so forth. And there's not enough to tell the big ships to watch out for the little guys. And there's very little protocol to make sure that they're prepared for an oil spill. So we're working on that still. And it's a tough thing because the world shipping community doesn't want to do this with every place they pass. But there's a special provision in law of the sea, for example, that says they have to do it in the Arctic. So we're working on making sure it happens.
And, you know, there's some interesting players in this, and you talked about the neighborhood of the far north that's sharing the 8 countries that share. Yeah, where's China coming in on this whole thing? Because China is claiming something.
No. Here's exactly where they are. We have 8 nations of the Arctic Council. And then we've got something very unique that Alaskans really need to understand is quite special. We have sitting permanently at the table. We have the Inuit Circumpolar Council.
Right.
We have the Russian indigenous peoples of the north. We have the Sami people from Lapland. We have the Aleuts. We have the Gwich'in. We have the Athabascans. And so they are there. So you've got the 8 national governments. You've got these indigenous groups. And then we have other countries and other groups that want to show up to be observers, which means we let them in the room. They don't get to talk. They can, talk to you at a coffee break on the sides of the meeting. But recently, China wanted into the door. Japan came into the door. Korea came into the door. Singapore came into the door.
Wow.
The Europeans came in, and they said, why? They said, because if you're going to set the standards of how we use this new ocean, we want to be there because it's, say, Japan trading with Europe that's going to be sending goods across the pole, or China trading with that. And the Chinese have actually gone ahead faster than we have to build icebreakers. So, yeah, they're showing up at the table, but we still control the meeting.
So they're still observers.
They're observers, yeah.
And you bring up the icebreakers because about 3 years ago, in a unique situation where we had a fuel that hadn't gotten delivered to Nome, and the Renda, the Russian tanker that came and was escorted through 300 miles of ice by the Coast Guard cutter Healy. And it became very apparent that when they were talking about that was the only icebreaker at that time that we had in the Bering Sea.
Yes, in fact, I will say it today to the crew of the Healy. If you were on the crew of the Healy, gave Christmas with your family.
That's right.
So that Nome didn't freeze in the dark.
That's right.
And I got a phone call from various friends. Dave Hoffman's president of Sitnasuk, Jason Evans is chair, and the folks were trying to put this together. And I said, oh my gosh, that's going to be really tough on the Russian side. It ended up in, we had to get a waiver of the Jones Act to be able to pick up fuel in ADAC, and we got that over Christmas. We had to get the Coast Guard to keep the Healy here, and I got a call from Admiral Ostabo, and he said, well, I'm going to let them go home because the Russians, we're not even sure this Russian vessel will be able to pass our inspection. I said, please, let's see what we can do. I don't want this to fail because of us. And I was here when the ship arrived, very, very proud of what we've done.
Absolutely.
Last week, I happened to see the Russian ambassador, and we both talked about this publicly at a forum. And even though our country and Russia have big problems right now, and I have big personal problems with what Putin's doing in Ukraine, and frankly, what's happening to us in the Middle East, I think some of his guys are sponsoring. But all I'll say is this, is that we have a common interest in safe seas in the Arctic. We have a common interest in knowing how to manage our fish in the Arctic. We have a common interest in helping to maintain indigenous whaling, indigenous walrus work. And a lot of that work between our countries, we got to drive it out of politics down to the neighborhood. Okay? So that people like Vera Metcalf can do the visa free travel for natives. So that we can have the process with the Polar Bear Commission, the Nunuk Commission, or the Walrus Commission, so that these people know and can share the data. And, it's very, very important to me that the legacy of what we did in 1988 on that first friendship flight, I was on from Nome with Governor Hippo, Governor Cooper, Caleb, Jim Stimple here got it started. We all pushed hard to make that happen. Leo Rasmussen was on the flight. We got the border opened up, and we should always keep it open.
We should, and it's stuff that to the Rendra and that whole. And when you said you were here, and I was in the winter, I'm director of community schools, so I work with the children a lot.
Thank you.
And I cannot tell, my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure to do it. it was so exciting because it all worked. And what you just said is so true. The interrelationship between the Russians, the Americans, the Coast Guard, the private enterprise, local, all of these things, it was like, and I remember the kids baked cookies and took them out to the boats, and it was magnificent to see, because it heralds the future.
Well, here's the thing. I'm hopeful that we can build out the Nome Port Complex, build out Port Clarence.
Yep.
All right, because the joke right now is the best deep water port in western Alaska is Providence. The best deep water port in northern Alaska is Herschel Island, and that's in Canada. Providence is in Russia. The fact is that we need a deep water port in the Arctic. Okay.
The response time is
and we can get it without blowing up a big hole.
That's right.
Point Hope. But the point here is that if we get that port built, we're going to have a place where ships can come in, refuge on our side. We're going to have a place where we can have good oil spill response. We're going to have a place where a large Coast Guard icebreaking cutter can be ported much of the year, if not all of the year. In my opinion, it should be all of the year, actually. I look at the opportunities here in western Alaska, and they're amazing. Okay, first off, the mineral prospects here in Nome are great. You go up and you've got the graphite deposit, and it's exciting to watch that one move along. I met with the people who are working the tungsten mine at Lost River, Ron Sheardown, my old friend, who's a great Arctic explorer. We've got the Northwest Arctic coal, which can be tied in. We've got an expansion at Red Dog. We've got all those things that can put people to work here if people want to do it. And our job in government is to make sure it's done right, get out of the way, get the decisions to be done clearly enough so that people can invest. But we do need to get the port. And I'll just say this: for those of you listening, you may have served in the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard does fantastic work in Alaska. Tom Ostabo, who just left as head of District 17, is going to Washington to be the number 3 guy for the Coast Guard. Admiral Zunkoff, who's the new commandant, is very familiar with Alaska. I've worked with him extensively on Arctic issues. He knows that we need to get investment. Alaska, the state, and some native corporations I've talked to, other private interests I've talked to, are ready to help lease an icebreaker to the Coast Guard if they can't get the $1 billion to buy it. And frankly, they may save money by leasing it. We have to push. And Richard, if this had been the Panama Canal, okay, if the Arctic were an isthmus, there'd be no question in everybody's mind we got to get a canal started. In this case, it's a brand new ocean. If we don't move and make the investments that we're talking about, Russia's going to control it. And do we want Russia to be able to turn off the tap on a quarter of the world's energy?
No,
I don't think so.
Yep.
So that's why we've got to stand up for it.
My guest, Lieutenant Governor of Alaska, Mead Treadwell, a visionary. I think that's a good word. I think you are. You're a practical visionary. You're able to see down the long haul and see down the long road, and I think that's so exciting for us as Alaskans and for the country as well. Our strategic importance to this nation, is phenomenal because, again, of our geography. There's another subject I want to get to because I just heard this about 10 minutes ago, right as we were going on the air, and he said, I got to do a little piece. Can you work with me to send to my friend Buzz Aldrin? Hello, Central. I mean, to go into the moon was, Buzz, if you're out there and if you're watching, your friend Mead, you are a hero.
Absolutely.
Neil, all of you, you captured the imagination of a generation. I remember Kennedy's speech. We'll go, and we did.
We got there by July 20th, 1969.
Yes.
So this part of the video we're going to cut out. And we're going to send to Buzz, and this is about the 45th anniversary of Neil and Buzz walking on the moon. They've got a channel, and I'll just say this. Buzz, my mentor in Alaska, couldn't be here tonight. He was buried standing up. His name was Wally Hickel. He had been Richard Nixon's Secretary of the Interior at the time you launched from Cape Kennedy, now Cape Canaveral. Wally was absolutely amazed. He was there at the launch, And he told you and me as we were sailing on his boat in Prince William Sound a few years ago how you guys had already orbited the Earth, and he hadn't gotten out of the traffic jam to get away from Cape Kennedy, from the launch site. But it was just one of the amazing things, and he grew up in a dirt-poor farm in Kansas, in Dust Bowl, Kansas, and he saw what was possible. Buzz and I met in the early 80s when I was one of 5 laymen. Because I live on this frontier, I was invited by an MIT professor to join 45 scientists and astronauts, including Buzz and Jack Schmitt, at a plan to return the moon. We spent a week at Los Alamos planning it. That ultimately became the Bush plan in Bush 1. In 1969, I stood with all the Apollo astronauts as we announced it. It was almost dead on arrival with Congress. Then, there have been other plans since. And the thing that I love about Buzz is that it was his configuration, it was his orbital configuration that if you watch Tom Wolfe's movie, The Right Stuff, the president President Kennedy threw those guys out of the office and said, "You guys figure it out." Buzz figured out how we would get to the moon, and he's got a great plan of how to get back to Mars. Be that as it may, I'm just going to say this. July 20th, 1969, I'm at a lake cabin that our family has on a little lake in Michigan, near Lake Michigan, in the Pinky, in Leelanau County. There's other astronauts who come from there. Shorty Powers actually lived down the road, the voice of Mission Control.
Yep.
And I was driving on M204 between Sutton's Bay and Leland, Michigan with my dad. And he and my mom had just had an argument. I remember, "Dad, do you think you and Mom are going to make it?" And he says, "Yeah, of course we'll make it. We couldn't possibly afford to get divorced." But he said, "Oh, quiet, let's listen to the radio." And it was, there was the voice from the moon. "Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed."
I get clapped.
Yeah, I get the shivers here.
It just...
And then we went home, and it was 4 or 5 hours between the time they landed and the time of that first step, small step for man, and Buzz's great words, "magnificent desolation."
Magnificent desolation.
And I remember that. And here's what I have to say. We are a spacefaring people. We are now longer time since 1969 than Magellan was after 1492, all right? Columbus came to America, Magellan went around the world, and we have to get off our duff, and we have to get back into the space business to stay, because it's going to provide resources for the planet. It's going to provide an expansion of the human race. It's going to advance science, and it has already tremendously helped people. And Buzz, hats off to you. Hats off to Neil. Hats off to all your Apollo colleagues for making this happen. And I don't know where you were that day. Where were you?
I got to be honest with you, I was in Central Park on an outside screen when I was living in New York. And embarrassing, I was drunk as a skunk. And I remember, which I stopped drinking 22 years ago, but I got to be honest with you, I remember, and it was cold, it was raining. And even though it was July...
What was playing on Broadway? Were you an actor on Broadway at the time?
I was not at the time. No, at the time that was kind of big. Yeah, no, it wasn't. I wasn't. Yeah. I think I was just between shows. I think they called.
All right, so Buzz, here we are, 2 guys sitting on Front Street in Nome, Alaska, on the edge of America, remembering your feat 45 years ago.
Reminiscing on a time, because I know you from just hearing, because it's I grew up with it.
Yeah.
It captured my imagination when I was 10 years old, watching the Mercury program. And we never could get the damn thing off the ground. Right. And then now we're...
Like my mom would let me stay home from school anytime those guys were going up. But here's what I'll say. We live on the frontier, okay? We are still building roads. We are still trying to get things started here in the Arctic. And in some ways, we understand that space frontier better than the rest of America.
In a way, we do.
And Governor Hickel always used to say that nothing is as important as a decision to go. You decide you're going to do it, and then you figure out how to make it happen. And most people are saying, well, is it possible to make it happen? I say, let's decide we're going to go back to the moon to stay. Let's get that helium-3. Let's get the regolith to protect the space station. Let's get people down the gravity well so that we can actually make spacefaring a much more common practice of humans.
You know, there's a
And
spirit.
let's go on to the moon.
There's a
And
spirit
let's go on
of
to Mars.
There's a spirit of explorers, and across the street is the statue of Raoul Amundsen, the great Norwegian that came through the Northwest Passage, and who then with the dirigible
Came back with the Norgay.
with the Norgay.
Yep.
And it's that spirit that still lives in very much in Alaska. And you, Mead, to your credit, have kind of kept that, gotten us kind of back into that as far as the far north.
Well, here I am running for the U.S. Senate, but the only club I ever really wanted to belong to was the Explorers Club. And
in New York?
Part of it was for taking expeditions out of here to Wrangel Island and opening up the Russian coast after 70 years of communism. And here we go. Hats off to you.
Hats off. Mr. Aldrin, Colonel, what was he, a colonel?
Yeah.
Colonel Aldrin, you have my respect and the respect of a whole generation. Hello, sir.
Thanks very much.
And just to close things up, my guest has been Mead Treadwell, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alaska. I'm so proud you've been on the show.
Well, thank you.
I get a little teary when I talk to people like you, because there's such admiration, and you're doing the right thing. So with that, thanks. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, and everybody watching. You know, people of Alaska come first. We're going to protect food security in the Arctic. We're going to get more jobs for people in the Arctic. And, yes, one more thing about Buzz I should just tell you. After my wife Carol died, he came up and raised a whole lot of money, and we sent 10,000 kids to the Alaska Sea Life Center.
Oh.
The scholarships of the Sea Life Center have been done remote to help schools like your community schools around the state. And, Buzz, thank you for that as well.
Well, you know, and thank you for working people like with Vera Metcalf and those people, because they're such an important voice. Ladies and gentlemen, tune in next time. Don't know who my guest will be, but I'd like to have Gail Schobert, who's the president and CEO of Bering Straits Regional Corporation, and Carolyn Bettis, who's the commissioner of economic development. No, Commissioner Bettis, Carolyn. Anyway. We're going to have more guests. Thank you, Mead Treadwell.
You mean Susan Bell.
Did I say, what did I say?
Susan
Bell. Bettis, she works for HEIA.
Yeah.
Susan Bell.
Susan Bell.
I know me, too. Oh, she'll never forgive me.
Okay.
Tune in. Thank you so much.